It's now time for those lower finals to see who is going to be squaring off against Buff, War, Nerf, Rogue for that huge pot of points and prize pool. Welcome back, everyone. I'm Jack, and joining me on the desk, we've got Zyronic, Nagura, and Tettles. And Zyra, you got a big smile on your face. What's going on?
I feel a little short. I think I worked out a little too much. I'll adjust it afterwards.
We can raise the bar.
I'm going to stay down here for now. This is an interesting POV.
Stay down here where it's safe. But you know where it's not safe? Shrine of the Storm here, Nagura. Be particularly difficult with this necrotic affix, and I believe it's going to be on Tyrannical as well.
Yeah, we've seen the Eastern region specifically struggle with these affixes today and yesterday, specifically because of necrotic, right? Necrotic is causing so many problems for the tanks. We've seen even the Western region just have so much problems with that specific affix. We've seen some people even run Dwarf on the tanks just to get rid of them, something the Eastern region hasn't really picked up on yet. They just seem to be running Night Elf mostly on tanks, at least.
Sort of, and I understand where you're coming from to be able to start removing that dot effect, but you have to keep in mind with Shrine of the Storm, there's so many Shadow Melt skips required for this dungeon if they're using them properly, if they're building up towards that point. I mean, it is kind of a catch-22 of, yes, this is amazing to have because there's so many small mobs to deal with, but on the other hand, if it's critical to your success to be able to pull off some skips, you got to be going into that Shadow Melt for Shrine of the Storm.
So either way, they're both teams on the first pull here. We see One Last Chance actually doing this Shrine, this Initiate and Templar pulls, while Black Mamba was shrouding past that one, doing one of these ledges. They do one of the snap pulls on top of the Braziers here. Now, we actually saw that One Last Chance members were saying that they didn't actually practice this dungeon now because they didn't think they're going to get this far. So they're probably just going to wing it, and we'll see what happens and what One Last Chance does here.
Oh, I mean, I've been in their position before. I know how this is. It's like, oh wait, we're farther than we thought we would get. All right, let's just see what we can do, guys. Let's play it like a live key. You know, sometimes it works out for you, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. And they're against the right team to do that. Black Mamba, they can either be a really good team, they can look like the second or third best team in the tournament, or they can just look like probably one of the worst teams in the tournament. So we're going to have to keep an eye on them as well. So far, so good for Black Mamba that they pulled off their first pull. They didn't even commit their Bloodlust to it. So they were able to do that first snap pull incredibly easily. So not that big of a deal for them. Of course, the affixes are kind of very tank unfriendly here. Skittish, which shouldn't be too big of an issue with Double Rogue, but we've seen it be an issue for some teams in the past. And Necrotic as well, you're going to see a lot of kiting coming out from the tanks. You're going to see them pulling a lot of this trash earlier in the dungeon because most of it are casters, and they don't have too much of an issue with Necrotic. So keep an eye on these snap pulls. As long as these tanks are able to pull this off and they're able to not die to Necrotic, should be pretty easy selling for them. One thing we haven't mentioned yet, though, Cuddles is off the DK. He's on a Demon Hunter now. Yeah,
it's probably just going to be a comfort pick for him, I assume, because as they mentioned, they don't have an MDT for this, they don't have a route, they haven't really practiced this, so I assume they are going just back to their comfort picks and just playing as best as they can. I think the best way for them to deal with this is just to go slowly, at least as slow as they can and as safe as they can, and just hope for Black Mamba to make any sort of mistakes, as Black Mamba is struggling a little bit as Wong is dropping very low on that pull.
He didn't even have any Necrotic stacks there. His Necrotic stacks reset and he just died to no healing. What's going on their side? They're able to use the battle res, but their DPS are dying left and right due to the aggro problems, and it's skittish. They only have one Tricks of the Trade, so unfortunately Moon goes down too. Only the tank and healer are alive, and there's not any way they're going to be able to finish off this pull. What just happened?
So Envis actually did manage to Shadow Melt, I believe, so he's going to be able to get a full team rest up here, but yeah, maybe they pulled Helldis on accident. I think that's what actually happened, because I think they just wanted to pull the Initiates on top of the pull that they were just doing, and then pull Helldis on top of the boss, and maybe they mispulled Helldis, and then somehow it went wrong from there. Either way, a pretty huge time loss here for Black Mamba, and they're the ones who are supposed to be practicing this dungeon, right? They're the ones who are not surprised about getting that far, so they're the ones that need to go through this dungeon and actually win. And that One Last Chance, you really don't have an MDT or a route for this, but at the moment, One Last Chance, they're ahead. They have 16% trash versus the 12% from Black Mamba, and they have 0 death. So One Last Chance going a lot slower, of course, not doing those insane snapping pulls compared to Black Mamba maybe, but they're playing it safely.
I mean, I think the best case scenario for One Last Chance here is that they slowly push this dungeon as a live key.
Yeah.
They have no deaths, they play everything clean, and they end up beating a Black Mamba that has 30 or 40 deaths because they've been trying to do their MDI route and they haven't been able to pull it off. I can see a world in which that happens, and Black Mamba with that first wipe has already kind of got on the track. I mean, you can look at the percentages here as well,
Pulled the elemental.
Oh, unfortunate from One Last Chance. They do have their shadow melds available. Looks like they're just going to let people who pulled it and got in combat with it die. So, never mind. The zero death dream is dead for One Last Chance, unfortunately. So, not exactly what you want to see from them. They're going to have to run back now. So, keep an eye on them there. Black Mamba has gotten their pull done. No, they've pulled everything together. They have pulled Windspeaker as well with the boss. So they're going to AoE all those initiates on top of the boss, and they're going to make use of that haste rune that Windspeaker held as spawns for the boss. So we'll keep an eye on how they're planning on using the boss. Now, I think something we saw from teams in the West Cup last week is we saw teams commit their Bloodlust to a trash pull before the boss, and then they only use the Windspeaker Heldis rune because, of course, haste does kind of have diminishing returns as you get more of it. Honestly, what's the difference between having 40% more haste and 40% plus another haste buff on top of it? It does scale exponentially, but there's a kind of ceiling where haste doesn't really do much more for you once you hit GCD cap for a lot of these melee classes, so it's not really that big of a deal. It's better to spread out the haste buffs as well. So not exactly the most efficient thing, I think, to use Bloodlust and Windspeaker Heldis at the same time on the boss. So, but inefficiencies aren't that big of a deal when you're the team that has the MDI route and the other team doesn't really know exactly what they're doing in the dungeon.
Yeah, so One Last Chance did manage to get everyone back up. They managed to skip the elemental this time around. Now there's this small little gap where you can jump down the edge, and then you won't aggro the elemental, but it does have true side, so you want to be careful to not get too close to it. Sometimes, for safety reasons, rogues will just distract the elemental, because even if a mob has true side, it still matters in which direction the mob is looking towards, because if you're walking in front of the mob and the mob is looking towards you, it's going to be a bigger aggro range than if you're walking behind the mob and it's not facing you. So sometimes a distract will help there. Unfortunately, it did not happen for One Last Chance, as they had a full team wipe there once they pulled it, but they did recover now. They are on their way to also engage Aquaseer and also committing their Bloodlust.
Yep, and of course, this is kind of the thing like we expected them to do. They're not really doing anything MDI related. They're not pulling Windspeaker Heldis on top of the boss. They're just going to pull as like a live key. This is exactly what their strategy is done. I actually, believe it or not, I actually did the exact same thing in MDI once when we did what was the name of the awful dungeon at Legion? What was the worst dungeon that nobody pushed keys on? Yeah, Sea of the Triumvirate. We didn't have an MDI route set up for Sea of the Triumvirate at all. But we knew that when we were playing against Revo Fevi, who loved Sea of the Triumvirate, we're like, you know what? He's going to pick it. So that's what we did. We called it like a live key, and somehow things worked out. So, sometimes things work out. We won the key we had no practice for. So, sometimes it will work out. So it just takes the other team being a little less consistent than they should be to win the key. Now, to be fair, I don't think they had any practice in the key either, so it wasn't exactly good for either of us, but it's a little bit different this time around. Like, Black Mamba has the practice in this key to actually pull it properly if they're able to pull it off. But, so far they've been pretty inconsistent with their pulls.
Yeah, in the long run, if you have one team that just plays safe and steady and the other team that does those huge MDI pulls, right? In the long run, the team with the huge pulls is probably going to be better than you. But in one specific scenario, like on this map, for example, if one team just has a huge team wipe, especially on those really huge pulls that they commit a lot of cooldowns for, then it's very easy for the other team to just catch up. Now, there's still a 3-game series, right? So they have to win one more after this one if it would happen that they pull off the win in Shrine here. But either way, Black Mamba did down Aquaseer here, so they're on their way to do some more trash. As you can see, they are snapping more mobs here in the brass. One of the mobs did not actually get snapped, but it's not a huge problem because we don't have bolstering anymore, so it doesn't matter if one mob doesn't die at the same time as all the other mobs.
And looking forward to the series, like you mentioned, they do have to win multiple maps. You can't just kind of luck your way into one map and win the series. You have to win 2 maps, and the next map in the series is King's Rest, which is a map that, once again, Black Mamba has a good strategy for. We've seen them almost pull it off. We actually have seen them pull it off outside of the first pull before in the first Eastern Cup. We know what it looks like for them when it goes well. So as long as they have a clean run, they should win the King's Rest. But should is a pretty important word. Like, Black Mamba, just this entire week, they haven't been playing like the good Black Mamba. They've been playing like the Black Mamba pretty much the entire weekend. So are they going to come out to play? We have to keep an eye on them. That first wipe, just showed us more of the bad side. We need to see more of the good side from them.
The one thing I really want to see out of Black Mamba is one facing the last boss, though, because they are playing the setup for it, right? And that's what they wanted to do the last time around. The only reason why they didn't manage to one face was because they unfortunately had the boss reset when the rogues already committed their cooldowns on it, and then they even had a wipe anyway. So lots of things went wrong on the last boss for Black Mamba, but I do believe that their plan is, and that their practice is for one facing the last boss. And with one facing, I mean only getting one intermission phase, which is something we haven't really seen yet in an 18, in a plus 18. We've seen it one time in a plus 17, but not yet in a plus 18. Something that Abracadabra also was trying to do last time around, but they were too slow to even show that strategy.
Oh, I mean, we are both convinced that Abracadabra absolutely would have pulled that off. That boss was getting absolutely shadow realmed. He was getting destroyed. Unfortunately, they lost the dungeon before we got to see them finish the boss off. They finished the boss at like 40%, but the boss was at like 20 energy when it was at 40%. They were destroying that with the DK, the Army of the Dead, with Bloodlust, all of that combined. So we'll have to see if that DK really is the game changer, if that's what's going to make you be able to one-phase the boss. Black Mamba opting for the super safe skip here that doesn't require any Shadow Melds. It only requires a Vanish from the Rogue or the Shadow Meld. It looks like they did use the Shadow Meld instead of the Vanish on Moon there. Yeah, you can have the Rogue actually pull the Guardian Elemental back. The entire other group stays out of combat, and the Rogue can cloak and then uses his grappling hook past the boss, and then he can vanish or Shadow Meld afterwards. Everyone can skip by with only using one Shadow Meld / vanish. So a little bit of a safety pull from them. I wonder if they're going to opt to use those Shadow Melds later on in the next 2 minutes or so, which would make a little bit of sense if they do plan on doing that, or if that's just like a super safe skip that they plan on doing instead of having to have the entire group pull off the Shadow Meld at the same time.
So Black Mamba was actually doing this one snapping pull again in this area, which I've talked about the last time we've seen it from Mamba, which was pretty well executed the last time around, just because they were cleaning this whole trash in this area so quickly because of the snapping area that they figured out on this ledge over there where we saw Wong. But this time it looks like they went a little bit slower compared to last time. Not sure if it might just be because they are scared about Shrine because they already had a huge wipe earlier, or because they know they're a little bit ahead. I mean, at this point they're not even that far ahead, so they can't play super safe, but maybe they're just a little bit scared compared to what we saw last time around. Either way, One Last Chance did decide to finish off the Void Emissary, and we see Rhinen actually go down, unfortunately. There's no one in that team who can rest other than the Rest Druid, so there's no way of him getting back. He does release. Maybe they're able to kite out this pull because they did finish off Heldis as well, so there's no trash that they have to avoid in the back.
Yeah, the tank is going to have to go full kite mode. You can't actually get any necrotic strikes or take any melees here, so keep an eye on that. Tay has already procced his cheat death, so he doesn't have that available. If he pulls aggro, he's definitely just going to instantly die. The problem with going full kite mode here is all the trash is going to be spread out. There's no efficient cleave that's going to be able to go out, so keep an eye on that. But however, the healer is back, so they should be able to, deal with this. It was a little inefficient, but the fact that they were able to turn a healer death into just a little bit of inefficiency in terms of cleave is an impressive save from them. They're definitely these guys are definitely experienced with pushing keys on live, so doing a push key like this is something they're used to doing. So they have like the whereabouts to actually like play safe and fix mistakes. That's kind of what I'd call it. I don't really know how exactly to describe it other than that. They're playing properly. It's just you can see the difference in what a live strategy looks like versus what an MDI crafted MDT route looks like on the side of Black Mamba. You're 10% ahead on trash and you're already engaged in the second boss. Like, there's definitely a huge difference in how this dungeon's being pulled right now.
Yeah, so they are engaging the boss on Black Mamba's side. No Bloodlust available to them. They do have one Battle Rest though, so in case something goes wrong, they can get them back up. And Black Mamba also has 2 Battle Rests in their group, so they have the Rest Druid and the DK, so double safety there. They also are not pulling off this ledge strategy that we've seen from Team D and before Nerf Rogue, something that Black Mamba doesn't really want to do. Not completely sure why. The reason maybe it really has to do with tank safety, specifically because of necrotic. Right, this boss already pretty difficult to deal with. If you have necrotic, of course there's a zone where you can reset it and run into it, but outside of that you still need to be very careful on how you position yourself as a tank.
Didn't we see Black Mamba using the rock spot last weekend or 2 weekends ago? I'm not sure why they're not doing it now if they did.
I don't think so, but I might be wrong.
I mean, I just feel like any team that's doing this key, why wouldn't you use that spot? It makes the boss so much easier to do. It just seems like silly to not do. I don't know. Questions are. Obviously we're not going to answer that question. We're going to have to ask them afterwards, and they're going to have to respond too. So, no idea why they don't plan on using that spot. Maybe they're worried they're going to get called out for using exploit or something. I'm not too sure. But what we can see is that they're opting to go for the very safe strategy of DPSing down Gale Caller Fae first, probably because they aren't using the safe spot. And more than likely, we'll see them try to cleave some trash on top of Brother Ironhole once Gale Caller Fae goes down. There's an option that they might not do that because Necrotic is a little bit scary when you're doing that. You can kite the boss around, but it's still adding some difficulty to a pull that. For them, honestly, at this point in the dungeon, they don't need to add difficulty. They're pretty securely ahead right now.
Yeah, we see One Last Chance still dealing with the trash here before Brother Ironhole and Gale Caller Fae. Now the initiates are actually kind of dangerous to deal with just because of the Necrotic, so you want to make sure that you down them very quickly and that you have some sort of AoE stun or AoE abilities to make sure that the tank does not have to tank them. That's why Sharos did jump out, but he's got 50 stacks. He's unhealable right now, so if he does get any more damage, he goes down, and there we go. Sharos going down. They do have one Battle Res available in case they want to get him back up, and it seems like they have to because there's still some apprentices that are pretty high HP.
Yeah, that was spooky. He instantly snapped the mobs, and he just instantly got like 40 stacks of Necrotic, like instantly pretty much unhealable. So, I mean, it was like 44 stacks, which is instantly an 88% healing reduction, and then the next swings from the initiate's unhealable. So he was going to go down just to the dot damage. One melee swing would have just killed him quickly. That was very unfortunate. But they did have the battle res, so the pull is saved at that point. So not too big of a deal. They just want to have another battle res for another 5 minutes or so on their board. Black Mamba, however, like we mentioned, they ended up pulling 2 of those Tide Sage Enforcers, or actually just 1 on top of the boss, so a little bit, they're making the next pull safer. I mean, we talk about after this, there's a lot of dangerous pulls in this dungeon. I think the most dangerous out of any of the pulls has to be that is this large pull you do after the second boss where you pull up to 5 or 6 of these Tide Sage Enforcers that do a lot of tank damage. That Anchor Smash, that does a lot of damage if you get hit by it. You can kite it out, actually, and not get hit by it, which is what we normally see most tanks just not going anywhere near the mobs. Problem is, when you're kiting this boss around, you have to really be careful not to kite too far, because your melee could accidentally pull aggro and die, especially on the skittish affix, so got to keep an eye on that. Of course, the Enforcer did go down for them, so we'll have to see how they do end up pulling this Enforcer pack right after the second boss.
We've actually seen none of the teams pull the Enforcer pack so far. They were just opting to pull the Ritualist instead, which I mean, it does enable the spawn, so in case something does go wrong later on, you can just skip it. But it seems like Black Mamba is not doing any of it at all. They're just skipping forward. They have enough trash to get the percentage that they need from the bridge, so they don't actually have to do the Enforcers. And I think I like the strategy that both Black Mamba and One Last Chance are playing here, that they do get enough trash to not have to deal with the Enforcers, just because of what you were just saying, right? The Enforcer pack is just super hard to deal with, not only with normal affixes, but you have Necrotic making it even harder on the tank, in my opinion. So, and them opting not to pull it is a good choice, in my opinion. Now, One Last Chance, on the other hand, they're already on 76% trash, which I believe they're not going to be able to skip that much trash later on, but we will see what they have to do. We also saw Pixel earlier that seemed to not have a proper route for this dungeon, get a lot of trash, and then they just had too much trash. They had like 93% trash when they went to Storm Song, so definitely too much. So hopefully One Last Chance does find some more trash that they can skip later on so they don't go over 100.
Well, this makes total sense, right? If they're doing their live route strategy, what they're going to probably end up doing is they're going to skip all of the trash on the bridge except for one of these patrols. They're not going to do the double tentacle pack that we normally see most groups do. They're probably going to skip all the way to the end of the bridge using Shroud and Shadow Meld and whatnot, and they'll probably only pull this one pack that we see Black Mamba pulling right now, and that'll give them their percentage that they need, or they'll still have a little bit extra, as we see Black Mamba's at 74 right now, whereas One Last Chance is at 76. But honestly, 2% trash whenever you're just coming up with a route off the top of your head, I'll take it. That's pretty close, to be honest. So kind of impressive to see that they're getting that close. Maybe they just kind of threw together a route right off the top of their heads right before the match just to see how much trash percentage they actually needed on this particular route. But yeah, I mean, they can just do this one pack that Black Mamba's doing and they'll have enough trash. Pretty close.
Yeah, they also have their Bloodlust ready. I believe if I was One Last Chance, I would probably just pop the Bloodlust here, just because they will probably have another 10 minutes in this dungeon because they're just now fighting Brother Ironhole. Unfortunately, can actually drop proccing the cheat death, as both the rogues got hit by the frontal, as far as I'm aware. Fortunately, they did survive because they don't have a battle res available to them, so they gotta be careful. Rhinon also has to use the Innervate here, as he's really low on mana, but with only Brother Ironhole left, it should be no problem for them to finish it off, as Brother Ironhole doesn't really do anything special other than tank damage and the frontal that you need to dodge, and Rhinon is looking for the and force it to pull on top of Brother Ironhall here.
Let's see if Envy's going to get that 6 staff proc here to one-shot all the Abyss Dwellers. Looks like he's not going to get it. He's probably going to save it for trash for the final boss. So no cool Twitch plays from Envy's here, unfortunately. We'll have to wait for that later on. And, you know, it's kind of interesting to think about because we saw Black Mamba pull their Shrine of the Storm earlier yesterday, and they actually had like a very solid time. I mean, I'm going to go so far as to compare them to what Method EU was doing in the previous week, where Method EU, on a good run, they would kill Lord Stormsong about 17 minutes, 17:30. Black Mamba, on their clean run yesterday, they killed Lord Stormsong at 19 minutes, which honestly is pretty close in considering the difference in the two regions that we've seen and the difference in affixes. So they're not that far off of having like a very, very good Shrine of the Storm time. Unfortunately, they had those issues on the final boss, which we hope we won't see later on in this dungeon, you know, a few minutes from now. But yeah, their strategy seems very impressive. But, you know, that's kind of the name of the story with Black Mamba. They always have good strategy, but their execution is always just slightly lacking.
Yeah, I agree. This time around, I mean, they only had this one wipe at the very start of the dungeon, right? So other than that, they did recover pretty well. So as long as they execute those last 2 bosses properly, which they haven't done the last time around, then they definitely do still have a good time. Now, One Last Chance did hear me, and they actually did use the Bloodlust on Brother Ironhall there at the very end. So they will probably do get another use off of it. But yeah, one more thing to note about Black Mamba was Envy's, right? Envy's the Wrestler Druid who actually does a lot of damage all the time. We've been talking about his damage as this time around he unfortunately did get the very first Mindbender here in Lord Stormsong, so he couldn't do as much damage as he did last time. But last time around he was out DPSing one of his rogues. He was doing 30k single target DPS, out DPSing the rogues. He's running full offensive build, at least the last time around he was running full offensive, and their goal is, I believe, to one face the last boss, and that's why they are holding on to the Bloodlust for this long as well. One Last Chance though, they actually are pulling the Tentacle pack, which they really don't need, I don't think.
Well, they also pulled it with the Patrol too, which is like, maybe they're opting to just skip all of the cultists before Lord Stormsong as well, which, can you even do that without Shroud? I don't know if you can.
The Dwellers,
Shroud.
you mean?
The Dwellers. I don't know if you can skip those without Shroud.
I think you need Shroud, yeah. They still have both available, though.
They do have the Shrouds available, so they actually can do that. Maybe this is perfectly planned out. That'd be very impressive if it was. We'll have to keep an eye on that. Unfortunately, Cuddles does end up going down, but it looks like the trash is all low enough, and they do have a battle res that they are using on him. I don't know if I would have used that battle res. You probably could have finished off the trash without that. It's all relatively low, and you only have 2 or 3 mobs left. So not a little bit of a questionable play, but you know what? They're just going for maximum damage here, so I can see it going both ways. However, Black Mamba has dealt with Lord Stormsong. Is at 3% here, should be going down very shortly. And, you know, they were at 19 minutes yesterday. They did have that one full wipe earlier on, so finishing it a minute and a half slower makes a little bit of sense.
Yeah, so One Last Chance are choosing to use that Shadow Melt here, killing the Dwellers after all, so they're going to go a little bit over percentage than what they actually need. Then, you know, the one thing I can think of is that they're not pulling the Denizens in the last room and just try to avoid them completely, just not pulling them. Then they can get the last percent from the eels only. Either way, they do have quite a lot of percentage compared to Black Mamba. They're on 86%, which is exactly what they need to get the enough percentage with the Denizens and the eel packs that they're going to pull on top of the boss. Now, what we usually see with the DK comp is that you'll see 2 Dweller packs, 2 eel packs, pulled on top of the boss at the very start, and then for the second intermission, once you come back up, you do pull the other 2 eel packs on top of the boss and use the Bloodlust and try to one-face it then.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on that. And we'll look at the boss percentages here. We've talked about this a little bit. On 17, teams need to get the boss to about low 70s percentage to even have a chance of one-phasing the boss, because it's actually still difficult on 17, even more so difficult on 18. If they can get the boss to that low 70s percentage with pulling eels on top of the boss, I think they have a shot. We'll have to keep an eye on how low the boss gets here.
Yeah, this time around they have to be very careful to not wipe here, because the last time around it was Envy's, I believe, that went down and then they didn't manage to finish off the boss afterwards. This time they do have 2 battle rests available, so they can get them back up, but the problem is once the Raster Druid dies, or the healer in general dies, he will lose the buff on him, the buff that does increase the damage done and reduces your max HP at the same time. So you don't want your healer to die at all. Now the problem is this time around they have Skittish, and Skittish actually quite a bit a problem on this boss specifically, just because of the amount of threat that Raster Druid is generating with the damage done and the healing done as well. Usually in this intermission phase here, the mob that you can see the tank kite right now does do a lot of damage to the tank, so they want to kite it, but because of Skittish they have to try to do as much damage as possible so the healer doesn't get aggro.
Unfortunately, on the side of One Last Chance, Il's DH did go down on Lord Stormsong, so they're going to have to do this boss with 2 DPS from 50% to 0. Actually, it was more like 70% to 0. And that kind of highlights why that kind of reckless battle res on the bridge trash pack, where the trash was all pretty much dead and they opted to use the battle res anyways, it's coming back to haunt them a little bit here because they're going to be very slow in pulling this boss. In the off chance that Black Mamba does have an issue with killing this boss here, like we saw from them earlier in the weekend, they're closing off their opportunities to have a chance to come back in this series. So that's a little unfortunate to see. This is a really nice pull. They know they're not going to one-face the boss at 82%. 82% is a little high, even with the Unholy Decay, I think. Pulling Abyssal Eels on top of the Denizens to actually triply so take care of that exponential damage, because it cleaves on all 3 of the Denizens, is actually pretty cool. I like to see this. But they don't interrupt the Consume Essence, and Envies goes down because of it. He had 90% reduced HP.
He went bare from instead of dispelling himself. He probably forgot about it. Maybe he didn't think about it, but you can dispel the magic effect off of you that reduces your max HP, and he would have been fine. He just needed to dispel himself, and he would have been fine. Either way, it was a problem from the damage dealers, and he probably didn't react well enough. So going bare from is not going to save you, unfortunately. But yeah. I wanted to see them try one-face the boss and have this bloodlust, but now they're not going to be able to do it again just because they don't have the buff on Envies anymore. They did manage to rest him back up, right? So they're going to be just fine to kill the boss. They're not going to have a wipe or anything like that. But because Envies does not have the buff anymore, he won't get this damage increase on the boss while the bloodlust is running.
Well, we can kind of guess, right? We can kind of guess looking at how much damage they end up doing to the boss here. And if they get the boss to, like, I would say probably 25-ish%. There's a chance they could have one-phased with the healer buff. But yeah, no, I mean, especially once losing that healer buff, it's stacking up right now, but it's not going to be anywhere close to the amount of damage he could be doing. They're really letting that Unholy Decay pop off, though, by pulling Eels throughout the entire phase here, letting him stack that Festermite up, that Azurite trait. So he's going to be doing a lot of damage, but nah, it's not even going to be close, mainly because of that healer debuff. But, you know, I don't think with the boss at 82%, you really have a chance to do it anyways.
Yeah, either way, just big problems for Black Mamba here and this boss in general. Like, the fact that they just miscalculated their interrupts on the damage is just a huge... Like, that's something that really should not be happening, because you can interrupt the Denizens with 2 interrupts in total. So if you're scared that one of the castles is going to go off, you can even just single target focus one Denizen down, making sure that everything's fine, and then you have 4 of your interrupters on one Denizen, and nothing should go wrong there. Either way, just huge problems again for Black Mamba here. They still have 1 battle rest left, so in case one more death occurs, they can get them back up. Envies does have the buff again. The boss does recast it, so in case you dispel it off of yourself or you die, the boss will recast it once in the normal phase. But unfortunately it was after the bloodlust was already gone. So they have to go through 1 more intermission phase, and look at the energy bar from the boss. It's actually almost halfway, so there's actually a chance that they might get 1 extra intermission phase even.
It's going to be close. When the boss transitions to the intermission the second time, those manifestations of the deep are still kind of patrolling towards the boss and slowly moving towards the boss. And of course, whenever one of those reaches the boss, it'll give him energy. And the boss transitions based off of energy. So when you see that purple bar fill up, they're going to get another transition phase. And it looks like without the bloodlust based off of the damage they did last phase, it's going to be very close. I believe they had the army for the previous phase as well, so they're just going to be doing even less damage. The difference is their healer has the buff here, so they could actually finish this off, but it's going to be very close.
Yeah, we see, yeah, it's definitely going to be close. I mean, so once the boss reaches 100% energy, he will also cast a little while before you get into the intermission phase, but I don't think they'll make it. He starts casting now. You can see the grasp cast on the top, and they won't make it, I don't think. So they have to go through 1 more intermission phase. On the other hand, 1 last chance. They're also now fighting Volsith. Unfortunately, 1 last chance. They're still on 86%. It's their first intermission phase, so it's definitely going to be Black Mamba. Black Mamba still has 3% trash that they have to do. I assume there's 1 more eel pack or some sort of eels that they can still do, because if there's no more eels available to them, then they're in trouble if there's no more trash, if they miscalculate it somehow.
I sure hope there's an eel pack available for them, because that'd be very interesting if there wasn't. They'd have to backtrack a lot to find something to finish off for the dungeon. So keep an eye on that. Of course, once they get out of this transition phase, they can just interrupt the boss and finish him off very, very easily. There's not a whole lot to do there. The boss at 3%. I mean, if they don't transition at 3%, whoa. well, we got some problems. So, yeah, no, I think they do have that one final eel pack, which will finish them off. But yeah, Volzith, not even two-phasing. I mean, that healer, losing that healer buff is a big deal for them. I mean, there's a lot of missed out damage, a lot of missed time there. Not, once again, I mean, Black Mamba in this dungeon, you would think that they should have this clean based off of their strategy, based off of their timing on Lord Stormsong, but there's just something about this room that they have a problem. Maybe they have like flashbacks to Restless Cabal or something. Maybe they just really don't like this boss room. There's something wrong here for them. That's what it's got to be. That being said, final Abyssal Eel pack going down, and they're not at 100% trash. They're at 99.9% trash. They got to deal with yet another eel pack. It's not over yet, Nagura.
There might be just one eel somewhere that reset early, because I was talking about this earlier. Sometimes eels will reset if you jump on top of a ledge or something like that. So maybe there's an eel somewhere in the water they can find. If not, then there's going to be a huge problem because they don't have enough flash. But unfortunately, one last chance healer Rhinon went down, and they do not have a rest available because they don't have a DK. So there is no chance for one last chance, unfortunately. But Black Mamba, they'll have to find that last 1% somewhere.
I don't remember where Brother Pike transports you, so it's gonna have to keep an eye on where they get transported to, because they still have to deal with one last piece.
I think they go to Stormsong's room.
Do they go to Stormsong's room? Okay,
I'm pretty sure.
If they go to Stormsong's room, that's not big of a deal. They have one more. They can actually. I think they left an occultist pack on the bridge to deal with, so it's not that big of a deal. But yeah, this is a very interesting mismanagement of trash percentage from Black Mamba. I mean, this is, like we mentioned, this room has not been nice to them at all.
No, yeah, and they're still missing that 1%. I mean, in the end, they
didn't pull it. They didn't pull it. We're taking a journey all the way back.
They've got to find something to finish off to get their last percentage, guys. Is it going to be the Abyss Dwellers? Is that what we're going to pull, guys?
The funny thing is, I mean, one last chance. If they didn't have a wipe there in the last boss, they might have even made it. They might have actually won against Black Mamba, but unfortunately, they did have a wipe, so one last chance does have enough time to find the last trash. Finally, they found a pack, and they have the 100% right there.
That was a kind of terrifying end of the dungeon. Black Mamba does end up taking game number 1 on that Shrine of the Storm, and I'm almost convinced that there was some sort of eel that was under the floor or reset.
Possibly.
I think it had to have been, if you walk into the room, it's on the left side or something like that, because those are usually the most notorious ones.
It could be one of those droplets, because you can actually pull the droplets from like the ledge in Acusir's room. Maybe if they would have missed like 1 or 2 of them.
That's true too.
With the High Noon Sunfire, they could have missed some of their count there, because I think those give like 0.14%.
Yeah, I even saw them do that. So maybe they just forgot about that this time around. I saw them do it yesterday, so maybe they forgot, or they didn't get all of the droplets.
Yeah, but overall, Black Mamba, the whole entire dungeon.
Wait, there they are. There they are.
Yeah,
you can see them
there. Okay, well, yeah.
Was it?
I saw it too.
And it was Black Mamba, though.
Yep.
Yeah. Oh, okay. Yeah. It was.
That was Black Mamba, yes. The whole entire dungeon was the Black Mamba show, is pretty much the whole entire root of this. They would have had an okay run, like 27 minutes is not exactly killer speed, but it's an acceptable dungeon overall. They had a few issues in the very beginning. Envy's right there. He ends up taking a bath, and that's actually a really good way of getting that mind control off you. Black Mamba then has some issues with count, which requires them to like run around a little bit, which
we've seen the last boss room be a whole pain for everybody, and having Envy's death on top of that certainly doesn't help. And one last chance also just wasn't able to capitalize on it since they had their wipe.
I mean, for what it's worth, Volzith is actually a pretty challenging fight as the healer, because any damage that you take, period, or any cast going off, or if you accidentally, if you end up killing that mob too quickly, and then like the second cast from the Mindbender goes off, you can just instantly die. There's like many ways that you can die on that fight.
So you're saying that you can't trust the DPS?
You can trust nobody on that fight as a healer.
I like the way you
even salute.
But you know what you can trust? You can trust us to let you know that there's going to be a quick break before we go into game number 2. So we'll be right back with the Mythic Dungeon International. Black Mamba is up 1 against one last chance as we're getting ourselves ready to go for the King's Rest. Fortified, Explosive, and Volcanic. Now, we've had some really nasty King's Rest in our history, especially in Season 1 going into this one. A little bit more light on this one's Heddles, but the Explosive, especially when we start getting into Machimba's room as well, can be pretty nasty.
Yeah, just with all those embalming fluids in Machimba's room, Explosive can be very dangerous. In addition to that, the first pull of the dungeon that you'll normally end up seeing, like one of the first pulls with the Golden Serpent room, people tend to overpull that because they have Bloodlust available, so it'll be interesting to see how these groups end up doing it. I know Black Mamba yesterday yesterday had a very interesting path where they pulled some kind of controversial packs. So it'll be interesting to see if they end up changing anything.
Yeah, I remember you mentioning that and pulling up the Mythic Dungeon tools. Thank you, Noga, by the way, for that. And having teams not pulling any of those extra constructs, not taking advantage of the fact that the frontal from them is now set in stone. No pun intended. Actually, it was. Got you. That it's always going to be going on to the tank there, so it's a lot easier to deal with. And even before Nagura, we were seeing teams pulling these constructs when they were much more dangerous for that gauntlet pull right after the first boss.
Yeah, you definitely want to pull those constructs, especially now with the change, as you mentioned, just because this extra percentage means so much, and there's so much downtime that you can't go past, right? With this gauntlet, you have to wait until a new one spawns, you have to wait until the gate opens. There's no way of you going past this. We actually see a little bit, some changes here. We see Asa Rogue come out of Cuddles here, so no more Demon Hunter, and we see the Windwalker from Black Mamba.
Didn't we see a couple of like double shroud setups coming in previously here, Tettles? That way they'd be able to get through that bridge pack?
Yeah, and we've also seen some triple shroud setups, but I think double is like required to get across the bridge. You just have to end up burning like a sky step potion. But we have seen stuff, I think it was No Girls Allowed that ended up using like a triple shroud setup that allowed them to be able to cross the whole entire bridge. So there's some unique stuff with how you traverse the bridge packs and where you're getting your count across the whole entire dungeon that makes King's Rest kind of interesting in terms of like, because it is very linear in terms of how the dungeon is done, but there are just like a few packs that you really want to skip at all costs. Like the most notable one is probably the Brute Pull. It'll end up taking you about 2 minutes, so we're seeing a lot of teams looking to skip that.
Yeah, especially when it's on Fortified under that one, and it's so much harder to be able to kite and bring it in. And it's always interesting to look at some of those larger trash pulls going into it. Like Shrine of the Storm, they got all their mini-boss mobs buffed up in terms of the percentage that they get. We've seen Peacekeepers that, while they're very tedious to deal with, you can just drag them along into anything else that you want because you can just kite them for days. But when we're looking at this Brute especially is ironic because of the ground effects, because of the amount of damage that it deals, how slow it is. It's just like one of the worst packs out there.
Also, the pack that it is socialed with is also terrible. There's a Beastmaster in it. There's 2 Raptors in it. It's just a bad pack in general to pull. So you don't want to see any teams pulling that. That's why I like Black Mamba's strategy in this dungeon. They just don't deal with that as well. Now I see Tuttle's pointing at me. It's not social if you pull off what method you use pulling. If you can do the double distract ring a piece to keep the Brute behind and not part of that pack, you can actually pull that pack without the Brute, which we saw method you pull off. But it's just a strategy I don't see these Eastern teams pulling off.
Yeah, and the reason that it's actually inside of that pack is because the Tides Emissary is inside of the pack, and whenever like a mob will generally patrol back and forth, they have it to where the patrol actually stops if it reaches a pack with the Tides, which is pretty interesting because it'll end up making some packs, like it allows the packs to like sit there with the Emissary. So that's why that Brute will end up getting stopped there. I don't expect to see anybody doing that double distract ring of peace stuff. That was very interesting for Method EU, but I do expect them to let the Brute patrol into the pack and then just completely skipping it with Meld or a Shroud or whatever else.
Shroud, yeah.
We haven't actually,
just something.
Something, yeah.
We haven't seen any other team do this method of use strat actually, so I really hope we're going to see it soon because I think that's actually just the best way to deal with this bridge area in general.
Well, especially since, I mean, we've looked at how teams are taking other people's strategies, and we saw it, I believe it was last week in particular. Yeah, there's not a lot of time for everybody else to be able to practice that, get ready to execute upon it, have any other additional innovations or iterations, but that's one thing Method U's done a lot of and done very well here is ironic, is making sure they're having those innovations in terms of their routing.
Well, there's not a lot of time to practice this week either. Everyone's playing Classic, Jack. So
That's true.
You're not going to have that much time to practice other people's strategies outside of time trials, so we'll have to keep an eye on that. But yeah, no, I think that's one of the strengths of the best teams, the Method U's, the Method NAs. I mean, even Team D, they're really good at copying other people's strategies and using that to their advantage. I mean, I think that's the biggest difference between the top teams and like the lower ranked teams is they're able to copy and effectively make the strategy their own.
Yeah, and I think Waycrest Manor was almost the most infamous one for that. We're looking at how teams almost immediately are like, oh, we're going to start grabbing mobs from this area. We're going to start taking them from that area. So far, even thinking about that dungeon, it seems like there hasn't been as much innovation with it this season. So it's interesting to think about how Reaping versus Beguiling is starting to change those different things up.
Yeah, I think the most notable thing that we saw other teams copy is this one ledge strategy in Shrine of the Storm where you jump up on the ledge with Gale Collar Phase, so you just avoid those tornadoes completely. And that's something the Eastern region came up with as well.
Very true on that one. We'll have to see as we're diving into King's Rest. One last chance is going to be needing to win on this one to avoid elimination as we're getting it going.
Yeah, so King's Rest is one of those dungeons we've seen lots and lots and lots of wipes in. Hopefully not this time around, as we see Black Mamba versus One Last Chance. And this is indeed one last chance for them, because if they don't win this game, they're going to be out of the tournament.
I'm surprised Jack didn't throw up his arms in anger that was going to be his quote.
I was going to let it go. Right.
Yeah. No, I mean, you're right. This actually is their last chance. If they lose in this dungeon, they go down. And we're seeing, not completely different pulls. I was going to say we normally see Black Mamba pull those animated guardians at the start, but we're also seeing One Last Chance do the similar pull. Problem is they're doing it with the Void Touch Emissary, which means they're going to be taking these explosions, these Queen's Decree hide casts, and they all have stacked. Cuddles did not opt to use his cloak. They did live through that stack, but the staff proc already used for Rhinon, so we won't have that available for another 10 minutes. I mean, it will come up later on in the dungeon. This dungeon's at least 20-25 minutes, but yeah, not having that available for any of these massive trash pulls early on is not going to be great for them. Now, I wouldn't say it's that big of a deal because he didn't have that much time to build up stacks anyways. But like, you kind of want to build the stacks up for a massive pull, like maybe the trash pull in Machimba's room as well, something like that, some big AoE pull, especially on this explosive where you want to make sure you get as much done as possible. I love this from One Last Chance though. They are completely going for the animated guardian strategy, pulling all four at the same time. And if I were them, I think they're probably going to try to cleave down those first two first, because having the tank have to actually point all four suppression slams at the same time is a little dangerous. There's a lot of dodging that has to go on here. They are all, of course, targeted at the tank, but they kind of start casting and then another one will start casting. There's a lot of overlapping going on here.
Yeah, it's definitely not easy to have them all be tanked at the very same time, because they also get an enrage effect at 50%, which increases their cast speed. So the suppression slam is actually going out faster once they are low, so it's even more dangerous to dodge. And as you mentioned, the tank can't just point them all in the same direction if they're not completely lined up, and they're not, as you can see right now. So once the first suppression slam is cast, the tank needs to move, and therefore they are put it in different directions. Now, unfortunately, Black Mamba did have some trouble with their skip. They opted not to pull any of those guardians compared to One Last Chance, but they did have some deaths come down, and Wong actually dying too on this trash pack here. They have to commit the battle rest, and hopefully they can recover as they pull two packs together here on the start.
I thought we had Black Mamba figured out. I thought we knew that they liked to pull those animated guardians at the start, but I think they don't even know what they want to do, because they've done a different start to this dungeon. The past 4 times we've seen them, and again, another DPS going down to those Gale Slashes, not even just getting aggro on the mobs, not even missed interrupts, it's just going down to the damage in the back, or getting hit by dodgeable damage. This is just not safe play from them.
Yeah, hopefully they're going to be able to finish off the Witch Doctor here, because with 1 DPS down, they do have less interrupts, and the interrupts is the one thing that makes this trash so dangerous. Just because the Witch Doctors constantly cast Deathly Chill on the tank, on the aggro target, and it's a huge burst of frost damage, and we all know that Prot Warriors are not the best tanks to deal with magic damage in general, so if they're out of Spell Reflect, then they just they can't really survive it that well. And then if you have 1 damage dealer down, basically 1 interrupter, then you might just have 1 too many Deathly Chills go through and the tank go down, but they did manage and they finished off the pack.
I mean, Shara's dropping incredibly low to the champion. They're very dangerous from them. I was going to say they're doing a very clean pull so far with only 0 deaths, but only 0 deaths, yeah. I don't think it goes lower than 0 deaths. But this is just an incredibly dangerous pull. They have to make sure they get the soothe off on the champion. They're not getting all the interrupts here. He's just taking a ton of damage. So you can see he has the Deathly Chill debuff on him, so he's a lot of casts are going through on him. Now here's the weird thing. Black Mamba, we know how they pull this dungeon. They just don't use their Bloodlust on the fortified trash, and it doesn't make any sense. We saw them do the same thing yesterday. They use Bloodlust on the boss, and it's like, it's a fortified dungeon. Do they know it's a fortified dungeon?
Maybe
they
don't
think it's tyrannical. Use your King's Rest trash, especially in this first boss room, is so difficult. Use your Bloodlust on the difficult part of the dungeon. The boss isn't difficult, it's nerfed.
Yeah, there's really a bunch of questionable things that Black Mamba do in King's Rest in general. Not only do they not use their Bloodlust on trash, which would be way more efficient, but they also don't run any dwarfs. So you can see in their group frame on the defensive buff row, you can see that every single player is playing a Night Elf, which, I mean, it makes sense if you want to do some sort of Night Elf skips for everyone except the Rogues, because Rogues do not need to be a Night Elf. They don't need to shut them out because they already have that Vanish available to them. As you can see on One Last Chance chat, they're actually running 4 Dwarfs. So Dwarf is so important for this dungeon because of duration, because of Stone Skin, which removes any sort of bleeding effects or dispellable effects. And because you have the Berserkers in this dungeon and the Council fight, there's so many bleeds that you can remove with the stone skin that it's so important to have. And Black Mamba actually struggled the last time around that they were playing this dungeon just because they didn't have the stone skin. The tank was going down to the bleed effects, and they struggled with some of the bridge pulls because of it. But they're not opting to change the ratios to dwarfs.
Sharos is getting absolutely pummeled by this trash shower. I think he was below 20% for a solid like 10 or 15 seconds there. Of course, back to full HP now, but that just looks so dangerous. He's kiting around this trash all over the place. I mean, credit where credit's due. He hasn't died outside of that one time so far, and they've been doing pretty massive trash pulls. I believe they did the entire room in 2 pulls, so good to see from them. One last chance. You know, it's a far cry from that Shrine of the Storm where they said they didn't have an MDT route practice. It looks like they actually know what they're doing in this dungeon, so far so good from them. I like what they're doing. I like their pull route. I like their Bloodlust usage on trash, not on the boss. I mean, it looks so much better for one last chance, and because they pulled those 4 animated Guardians plus the Void Emissary, they're 13% ahead in trash in this dungeon right now, which I would absolutely take in King's Rest over using Bloodlust on a Golden Serpent boss that you shouldn't have any problems DPSing down without Bloodlust. So absolutely advantage right now to one last chance, not to mention 4 less deaths on them.
Yeah, definitely agree with you. As long as they find trash to skip later on. I mean, I assume they have a wrap because they are playing 3 rogues, which is definitely not their comfort pick, I believe. I believe it will be the Demon Hunter coming out of Kettles. But if you run 3 rogues, there has to be some sort of strategy behind it. They're probably doing something with their shrouds later on, and that's what's enabling the dwarf ratios, right? Because Sharos does not have Vanish available, no Shadow Melt on him because of the dwarf. So I assume they're playing around those shrouds. Hopefully they do, because otherwise they're going to go over percentage again like we saw in Shrine, where they didn't really figure out the percentage properly. But Black Mamba, they did down the Golden Serpent at this point. They did not pull any of the constructs, so that's why Envis is actually out of range right now, as you can see in the group frames, because he's pulling 2 of them. He will pull 2 of the constructs on top of the gauntlet here.
Yeah, opting for the safer general pull that we see. Instead of doing the 3 or the 4 Guardians that we see from most teams, they're just going to do the 2. So interesting to see if they'll actually pull the other 2 later on. Though we've seen teams also do that. We've seen Method EU and Fat Shark S, sorry, 40k, pretty much Fat Shark S, do the exact same pull as well, where they would do 2 early on with the boss and then 2 later on with the gauntlet as well. I think I misspoke earlier as well. I said Sharos had a death. He didn't have a death. He just bamboozled me and got incredibly low multiple times on those trash packs. Only tank death, of course, being from Wong on the side of Black Mamba in that boss room as well on the trash, because they didn't pop the Bloodlust. So it's just kind of a weird pull strategy coming out from Black Mamba. Perfect on the board so far for one last chance, so no deaths on the board. They were able to deal with the Emissary pretty well as well. They just cleaved it down with the boss, so no problems there whatsoever. And I mean, you can just see there are no issues with this boss. It's a fortified, nerfed Golden Serpent. The Spit Gold debuff doesn't chunk you for a 70% of your health anymore, especially in fortified. So there's just no reason to commit your Bloodlust to this boss. It doesn't make any sense strategy-wise or anything-wise to commit your Bloodlust to this boss anymore. So just really questionable strategy decisions. And one last chance, even though they're killing the Golden Serpent, you know, a minute and a half after Black Mamba, they're still ahead on trash.
Yeah, most definitely.
And their Bloodlust is going to come up sooner too, so they're just ahead in the dungeon.
Yeah, I agree. This whole Bloodlust usage on the first boss, most of the teams went away from it. I mean, we saw it, I believe, in the very first cup still, some people using it there. Maybe just because out of habit, because they were used to doing it, but then people immediately adapted. Wong actually going down because he got stunned by the frontal of the Guardians. That means they don't have a Battle Rest available because they had to use it earlier on the trash where Wong went down as well. So this must just mean this is probably going to be a full team wipe. And the Guardians are so low as well. Hopefully Envis is going to be able to stay in combat with them, because the Guardians are literally on 1 to 5% HP, and they have so much. So if they have a full team wipe here going down, they have to do this whole pull again.
That's not what you want to do, Envies. I mean,
I think he did it on purpose.
Oh, maybe it was on purpose. It didn't look like it was on purpose. It looks like they didn't want to do that at all. But this is actually like very, very fortunate for them that they're able to finish off this Guardian. They both Shadow Melded, which should have dropped combat with the Guardian, but because it had to walk back to its spot, they were able to kill it separately. So that was like the most fortunate occurrence ever to happen for them. They were able to get the trash percentage that they got from the Guardian there, somehow saving the pull. I mean, they would have had to run all the way back. Well, it's not that far. They'd had to run back for like 30 or 45 seconds. But because of that sequence of events, they are able to get the res off from Envies. So the biggest problem here is the deaths on the board, plus they have to redo that gauntlet pack that they were on already.
And thankfully, the other Guardian was already dead, so they don't have to pull any more Guardians. They did finish them off. They just have to redo this pack, as you mentioned. But now, One Last Chance definitely ahead. Not only in trash percentage because of all the trash they did earlier before the first boss, but also just in raw dungeon speed. Now, this gauntlet here on the tournament realm is actually fixed. There's no RNG. It will always be the top left pack first, and then it will go counterclockwise. So all of the teams know exactly which packs are going to be next, and they can prepare for it properly. One thing to note about these gauntlets is that they're actually all named mobs, as you can see, and some of them are more difficult than others. I would say this pack that One Last Chance is fighting right now, and the one that Black Mamba wiped to, is one of the most dangerous ones, just because you need to interrupt this channel lightning, as you can see, not being interrupted on One Last Chance's side. And then you also see the whirlwind axe throw that you just saw on One Last Chance that just does a huge amount of AoE damage to the whole group. I assume it can be stone formed off, but that's not something Black Mamba has available to them.
And of course, the severing axe debuff is not that big of a deal. The only time I think I'm ever worried about severing axe is whenever it's like a raging affix and it's below that percent gaining that raging. That's when it does a lot of damage, and you kind of want to either just completely line aside it so you don't get it at all, or you want to just knock it back or something. I was really kind of curious to see why Rhinons wasn't typhooning that channel lightning, because he had it available during that first cast. He was just letting it cast for some particular reason. I'm not exactly sure why, but I'm not going to question the MDI players because they're always right and the casters are always wrong. So for sure. So yeah, I mean, One Last Chance. They have looked very impressive in this dungeon so far, and I'm kind of wondering, where have these guys been, the past MDI Cups? Because, in terms of teams, we haven't really seen too much. This team is new. They're relatively new. They look pretty good too.
I just love seeing people get mind controlled, and the mind controlled player just annoying other people. We saw Rhino on One Last Chance just spam rooting one of the rogues, and he was just standing there in the entangling roots. Unfortunate there. But the best part was when the Demon Hunter got when a rogue got mind controlled, and they actually had a Demon Hunter who was able to offensively dispel it, but then the rogue just immediately blinded him. That was just the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. And now Black Mamba, they are on the last pack here, so they actually caught up quite a bit. One Last Chance took a long time to finish off this pack because they were ahead when Black Mamba had the wipe, and now Black Mamba engaged with the last pack before One Last Chance did, actually.
I think they were pretty much just neck and neck, maybe a little bit ahead, so there's definitely a little bit of extra damage coming out from Black Mamba a little bit on these packs, a little bit better execution. But I mean, that being said, that has to happen for a lot more of these packs in the dungeon for Black Mamba to come back. Because I mean, we always talk about progression in the dungeon, but you kind of have to go back to it. Because Black Mamba, even though they finished the gauntlet first, they're still 5% trash behind. They still have 7 deaths on the board to One Last Chance is 0. They have a lot of time they have to make up in this dungeon to have any chance of winning the series. Because One Last Chance, the way they're playing right now, they're not looking very mistake prone.
Yeah, they have 0 deaths right now. Very clean run by them, and it really seems like they did practice this dungeon. Actually, they didn't just have a random MDT route right before the dungeon started. So, really think One Last Chance. This is their dungeon, and Black Mamba. I mean, they had problems in this dungeon before. They already played it yesterday. They played it multiple times, changing up their strategy all the time. Just meaning that they don't know really what to do in King's Rest, as you mentioned earlier. So they're just struggling in this dungeon. It's not really their dungeon. So now we can see a pretty significant pull for Black Mamba, but they left all of the droplets on the side here, and they also left the construct. So they only pulled some of the droplets with the Emissary of Tides.
And One Last Chance says, anything you can do, I can do better. They pull all of the embalming fluids, or as Slew calls them, the ooey gooeys. I'm not sure. I don't want to say the whole thing because I don't want to steal his bit and have him sue me. But those are his bits, not mine. They pull all of them, and the thing to look out for here is this is a lot of mobs for explosive. They have to control their explosives here. They do, however, like you mentioned, they have 3 rogues, which is probably the best explosive killer in the game because they still do their AoE damage with Blade Flurry even though they're hitting something that has low HP like explosives. They're doing a fantastic job not only killing the explosive, but kiting this trash around the room. This is a very impressive looking pull from One Last Chance.
Yeah, I really liked it. We saw a bunch of poisons actually go off. The Rhinos is is able to dispel the poison, so they are actually able to keep moving. Because if you get hit by one of those swirlies that you can see constantly spawning, then you do get one stack of the poison debuff, and it stacks up. It not only does it do damage to you, but it also reduces your movement. At some point, you just can't move anymore. You're stuck in place, or you rooted in place, and it does a lot of damage as well. So that's why you don't want to get hit by those. And now One Last Chance is pulling both of the constructs, both of the guardians together, but it seems like they were pulling it at the very same time. So one of the mobs is just casting, but you can interrupt the cast with the Typhoon.
Yeah, but also with the 3 rogues, you can also use your Vanish ability to to dodge the Interment cast. But unfortunately, as you can see, what happens when both of the construct casts go off at the same time? Sometimes you just kind of, if there's no coffin for you to go into that's already occupied, you just get stuck. And you can see Taydwarf. You can look at his player frame. He has that debuff there. He was standing still for a solid 30 seconds there. That's what happens if you pull these too close together. It's going to happen again. Kinsty, he's locked in place. He can't do anything for the next 30 or 40 seconds.
Yeah, you definitely just do not want to pull those constructs together, just because of this very reason, right? If you want to pull them at the same time, then you also need to move the constructs so the second person that gets put into a tome does not get put into the same one, because that's what's causing the problems. You always get put into the closest one, the closest home to yourself. So if you have the Guardians tanked onto the first one, as you can see on One Last Chance side, then 2 players will get put into one of the tomes, and it just backs out and they can't do it anymore. But this time I think they actually did pull it off, so the players spread out to not be too close to the same one twice.
They spread it out and they vanished one of the casts. Yeah. The casts were offset a little bit so they could get one player out and put another player into a coffin. So they fixed their problem. Well done, One Last Chance. But honestly, they just lost so much time due to 2 players not being able to do any damage. I mean, you can see Tay, who was the first player that got stunned, did absolutely no damage. He's below the healer. And Kinsey as well, who also was stunned for 30 seconds. The tank is a second on damage right now, so you can see exactly how much that cost them there. Now, something I was going to mention as well, if they do the 4 Guardian pull, are they also going to pull the Purification Construct? And it looks like they are. This is going to put them at 78% trash going into the bridge, which means they only have to pull 18% trash on the bridge, which is only 2 or 3 packs. They can skip a lot of the bridge. They can pull they can skip the Brood pack. They can skip the pack right after that as well. They only have to deal with, I believe, the first Berserker, and I think that's the only Berserker they have to deal with outside of the pack that has the tied to the Emissary in it. So as long as they're able to pull this off, which is quite dangerous, honestly, if you're looking at the health bars here, as that Purification beam goes around the room, you got to keep an eye on that. Now, Kinsey didn't quite proc his cheat death to the drain fluids there. That was a little dangerous. Yeah,
Kettle's already proccing a cheat death there, and Kettle's just dropping very low. You gotta watch out for the Purification Beam, and the problem is that there's also so many other abilities that you have to dodge. You can see the fire on the floor, making it super hard to also dodge the beam at the very same time. But the construct is about to go down, so just need to do a little bit more damage to make it happen. But this time around, we see the cloak go off from Kanstad just to get rid of the drain fluid here. Now, one thing you want to watch out for if you cloak the drain fluid is that the tank will get more damage, and this boss does a lot of tank damage, so you want to watch out that you don't want to use your cloak if you don't have to, because while the boss is casting the drain fluid, he doesn't actually hit the tank, so the tank does have some breathing room. If you cloak it off though, then he will immediately start hitting the tank again, and there might be some trouble if he doesn't have the proper cooldowns available.
Yeah, I think we're seeing a debuff on this fight that I don't think we've ever seen before in MDI play, where if you get targeted by the drain fluids and the drain fluid casts end, if you're below 90% HP, you get a debuff on you that reduces your damage done and reduces your movement speed until you're healed above 90%. And I believe 2 other players, both Kinsey, it was Kinsey both times actually, I believe, had that debuff on them for a solid 10 or 15 seconds total throughout this entire fight. So not exactly the cleanest play from them. They did pull the Purification Construct, which made this fight significantly more difficult. So that is kind of in their favor. And they also had an explosive go off when they were trying to kite away from the Purification Construct, and almost had a second one go off just now. That was very close. Thanks for the pistol shot crits there. But yeah, I mean, this just is, it's not the greatest of execution from them. Now, Black Mamba opting to do something very interesting. They pull the first pack on the bridge, they just double shrouded all the way to the 3rd boss.
Yeah, so they used their double shroud, got all the way to the boss here, which is something we've seen from them before, just because they want to unlock the respawn here. Because there's so many things that can go wrong on the bridge packs. They're so dangerous trash packs. We've seen multiple wipes and just people die left and right because of it, and especially because they don't have any dwarfs available, and so no stone form to get rid of those berserker bleeds. It's just good for them to kill the boss first, just to have the respawn here. If you don't kill this boss, then your respawn will still be at the very entrance of the instance, and because Black Mamba did not finish off this purification construct just like One Last Chance did, there's no way of them to skip to the bridge area either. So they need to walk all the way back from the entrance if anything goes wrong. So I like the fact that Black Mamba is going to the boss, but I mean, at this point, the game is still really close between those two, but I think One Last Chance, it took them quite a while to finish off those constructs, and also the purification one on top of the boss. I think they lost quite a bit of time just doing that.
Yeah, I think whether or not they're going to have a chance of winning this dungeon is going to come down to how they deal with this trash on the bridge. Fortunately, they've set themselves up for success in already having almost 80% trash coming to the bridge, so they'll very likely only have to do this trash back. They'll probably skip all the way to the third boss right afterwards, just like we saw Black Mamba do as well. And then they'll have less dangerous trash to deal with after the boss. So it's really going to come down to execution here. I mean, can they deal with these berserkers? Well, so far so good. They haven't stacked up any of those bleed stacks yet so far, but they'll have to keep an eye on that. I mean, this can go wrong very quickly. Bleed stack goes on Cuddles there, instantly Stones forms it off with the dwarf racial, so very good to see that removed there too. Yeah, it looks like they have this under control.
Yeah, definitely looks like they're doing just fine. We see one more bleed on Sharas. He already used the stone form for a 2-stack earlier, but they finish it off and they're fine at this point. They're 83%, so they definitely need to do some more trash, but they definitely do not have to do this brood pack here that we keep talking about. This brood pack is so dangerous to deal with, and not only dangerous, but also it just takes so long. Because it's a fortified setting, the brood already has a lot of HP. Fortified buffs it even more, and then on top of that, it just casts this huge area of denial, making your damage slow down even further, just because there's no way of you attacking while the area of denial is out. Even with your increased outlaw melee range that you have, it's still just going to be hard to do. Now, One Last Chance did aggro those berserkers.
They were too slow. They were just too slow. They had the second shroud come out. They ran out of shroud time.
Shadow Mode?
They don't have shroud. Well, only the healer.
I guess
Shadow
the
Mode.
tank doesn't have it. Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, if they were all in stealth and the rogues and the healer could have gotten in front, the tank could have just stayed behind and died. But unfortunately, that was not to be the case. They have to pull those two berserkers, and that's going to mess with their trash count just a little bit. But they do have most of their stone forms available. They only have one left now, so they'll have to hopefully have Kinstay take them to the face here, and at least not have them stack on the tank. This double berserker pull is very dangerous. Now, Kin did take that one stack just now, so it looks like they're going to be fine. As long as they don't stack up these last few bleeds on the same person, they should be able to get through this pull. But that was just not what you want to see. It wasn't the greatest pull from them. We do have one stack on the tank, but I think they're gonna be fine. Just one small final berserker. Yeah,
they were rotating the repose on their outlaw rogues, just going close, using the repose to just get rid of the debuffs completely. Then you don't even need to use your stone form at all if they don't get applied in the first place. But Black Mamba, on the other hand, they already down Akali, which is the last boss in this council rotation for the tournament realm. It's always Kula first, then Zenazal, and then Akali. No, Black Mamba has to deal with all of this bridge trash that One Last Chance didn't have to deal with. So this is going to be very dangerous for them. We've seen them wipe in the past to not this double berserker pack, but to the pack right afterwards, just because there's an emissary of tides in it, which makes it so hard to deal with. And unfortunately, the monk going down, he had 2 stacks from the berserkers, and he's not a dwarf, so there's no way of him to get rid of it.
Nobody on their team is a dwarf.
Yeah,
they don't have any stone force.
Yeah.
They don't have any way to get rid of any of these bleeds. So that might have been on purpose. You just like, you know what, sacrifice yourself so we don't have to deal with the bleeds. Maybe that's their plan. I don't know, but like it just seems so weird to not play dwarf in this dungeon. Stoneform is just so good for this second half of the dungeon, and you don't need Shadow Meld on Rogue. Just play dwarf.
Yeah, you really should just play dwarf. And they even have repose too to take those debuffs. In theory, on the rogues. So this is definitely a death that really shouldn't have happened on a monk. There was no need to have him sacrifice himself. Definitely was a mistake on their part. Now let's see if they actually pull this trash, because this is the trash pack. Yeah, there we go. So Wong is going in. This is a super dangerous pack that they have to deal with because of the emissary of tides in here. So we see the shield wall being popped immediately by Wong as all of those casters just go through. There's no way of them to be interrupted. And now we see Wong leap out as the emissary of tides did go down. You still have a berserker and a witch doctor left that need to be dealt with, though.
I mean, that's a pretty typical. We usually see most teams pull that trash pack. I think that's one of the more typical trash packs that we see. It is a dangerous pack because of the Emissary of Tides. Those Hex Priests do a lot of residual group damage, and if Hex goes on the wrong target, you could have just full on wiped to it. But I think teams are usually saving cooldowns for that pack to make sure that they can deal with the Emissary of the Tides and cleave down the headhunters and whatnot in that trash pack as quickly as possible. We don't normally see too many wipes on that pack because most teams are kind of prepared for it as one of the more dangerous packs to pull in the dungeon. But I mean, we can see how close together these two teams are right now. One last chance on 86% trash percentage. Still have a Ka'ali to deal with as the third part of this council boss. When Black Mamba deals with this trash pack, they're going to be at or above 86% trash. They're going to be neck and neck in the dungeon. Now, the one thing to look at, they do have 7 more deaths on the board on top of the one that One Last Chance has. So extra 35 seconds on the board for Black Mamba, but like it just looks like because they've been cleaner in the second half of the dungeon, that they're going to slowly be taking a lead here. And we've seen this before from Black Mamba. They have some catastrophic wipe or terrible play at the start of King's Rest, but then they're just able to play safe for the rest of the dungeon, and they somehow come back. I mean, Light goes down once again, but they have the checkpoint. They can skip past again.
Yeah, this is why they pull the council boss first. Envy's going down as well here, unfortunately. So they have both need to release. Now at this point, it's 40 seconds, right? So they really have to be careful now when it comes to death timers, because even though they are ahead in dungeon speed at this point, not even that far either, because right now, once they finish it off, they're going to be about even in percentage to One Last Chance. But One Last Chance only has to finish off a Kali, and then they're going to be done. So those 10 deaths, they might actually mean quite a bit. This time around, we see them do this one pull a lot safer than the last time. The last time we saw them pull this pack that they just engaged right now in the middle of fighting the other pack, and they'd had a couple of people die. They had to shut them out off aggro, they had to reset, but this time they played it a little bit safer, made sure that the pack was finished off, and then engaged the last pack. Now, One Last Chance is done with the boss, but they also need to do some more bridge trash.
Yeah, I mean, the only difference right now is the deaths on the board and where Black Mamba is on their current trash pull. I mean, Black Mamba, they're ahead in dungeon progression, so they've got less chances to make mistakes behind everything. More is in the rearview mirror for them. Like, they have less that they can mess up on. So I think they have a slight advantage right now. One Last Chance knows they're a little bit behind in dungeon progression, but they have those extra 45 seconds to deal with. But I mean, just looking at how they're dealing with this trash right now, I would say that One Last Chance are somehow in the lead right now. Once they deal with this Beastmaster and these 2 Raptors, all they have to do is deal with Shadow Azul, and they're done with their trash.
Let's just agree that they're really close to one another. I think this is just a very close game between those two. Black Mamba still has to do with this one last pack here. So 2 Raptors and 1 Beastmaster they have to deal with to get the last percentage that they need before they go to Shadow of Sul. Shadow of Sul does give approximately 4% trash, so both of the teams need to go up to 96 before they go to Shadow of Sul. Shadow of Sul, unfortunately, is not skippable. They need to finish it off to be able to access the last boss, and it is a 45 setting, so that mini boss is definitely one of the most dangerous ones, just because it does so much tank damage, so much magic damage onto the tank, which requires them to just have all of their defensive cooldowns ready to be able to survive it. And you also need to kill it pretty quickly, because once you run out of defensive cooldowns, it's going to be very hard for the tanks to stay alive. But Black Mamba are now finishing off their pack, and they are on the way to Shadow of Sul.
Black Mamba took forever to finish off those 2 final Raptors. It took them like an extra 30 seconds just to finish off the 2 Raptors once the Beastmaster was dead. But I want to say something about One Last Chance here. I love their movement right now. They know that how close this is right now. They know that they have to move. Even the steps they take in the dungeon, the movement they make through the dungeon is going to be dangerous as they drop so low. No deaths for that. But that was the staff proc for Rhinon. That was very dangerous for them. So that was spooky. He went down to like 5% or so. But I was going to say, they're moving with the trash pack, slowly kiting towards Shadow of Zul. Even dropping travel time. That's 5 seconds that they save just moving halfway across the bridge while they dealt with the trash pack. And we can look at the Bloodlust timings here. They pulled Shadow of Zul 15 seconds behind Black Mamba. With the 45-second difference, that means they're 30 seconds ahead. But unfortunately, Sharis goes down. They do have 1 more battle res available after this. So he has like 1 more chance to go down. And they're opting to do the safe strat that we saw even from teams like Abracadabra, where the tank just doesn't even want to deal with Shadow of Zul. He just gets out of there.
Yeah, so I'm not completely sure what happened there, because he died with defensives up. So that's a huge problem for One Last Chance. The boss still has so much HP. Carlos going down as well. It's still on like 40% that they have to go through. And even though Sharos is kiting, it's so hard for Rhinon to keep him up, because the debuff that he can see on Sharos is the cast that Shadow of Sul casts. And it's a dot. It's a damage over time effect. Sharos going down. They do have 1 more battle rest available, but now Rhinon's has aggro. You can see the debuff on top of Rhinon's, and now he's standing too close to the pool as well, and just AoEs and finishes him off. I'm not completely sure if they can even finish this off at all. As Shadow of Soul still 30% HP. Black Mamba on the other hand, they also committed their blood as Shadow of Soul, but dealt with it so much better. Now they're engaging King Dassar, and it's going to be their game now. One Last Chance just struggling so much on this mini-boss.
I mean, this Shadow of Zul play just threw the dungeon for One Last Chance completely. They were ahead. They were ahead when they pulled Shadow of Zul. And I mean, you could just see how much damage Shadow of Zul does to tanks here. Sharas died through Tree of Life Healing. He was getting absolutely pumped by Raynons. Like, I don't think there was anything more Raynons could do. I saw the Crucible of Flame 2 stack on top of Sharas. He had every single hot in the world on him, and he still went down. Like, that's just absolutely ridiculous to see. Now, like you mentioned, of course, both of these teams have killed off Shadow of Zul. They do have that extra 4% trash on the board, so they are both at 100% trash. All they have to do is finish off King Dassar to finish the dungeon, but it's looking more and more like we get closer and closer to this King Dassar kill for Black Mamba, like that they're going to take this series 2-0. I mean, this dungeon, I feel like they had no business winning this dungeon with the way One Last Chance played at the start, but One Last Chance throwing away their last chance, unfortunately, at the end of the dungeon on Shadow of Zul.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it was really close. Even if One Last Chance didn't wipe, I think it would have still been really close between those two teams. Just because Black Mamba, I feel like, had the better way of dealing with the trash later on. One Last Chance seemed to have a really nice strategy with the construct, as you mentioned, but how they dealt with the constructs was slowing them down too. They were pulling constructs on top of the boss on Machimba, and how they pulled both of those guardians, just adding up the cast, and then they didn't get the people out of the tombs and so on. Just all of those kind of things cost them a lot of time. While Black Mamba, yeah, they did have the huge wipe. They have 10 deaths on the board, right? So they definitely made mistakes too, but because their strategy seemed to be a little bit more refined, and because this huge mistake that happened to One Last Chance and Shadow of Soul, they're gonna be the ones to pull it off. There's still a 20 seconds difference in deaths, but there's just not gonna be enough. I don't think so, especially because I believe their single target damage is also a little bit worse on One Last Chance side, just because Black Mamba does have the Windwalker, which enables the other damage dealers more with their 5% buff as well.
Yeah, but I mean, at this point, they don't even have to deal with cleave. Loss is at 20%. It's just a single target encounter. There's nothing going on right now. As long as they dodge the tornadoes, they should be good to go. Envy's almost got hit there, and you can see Lyke also has that debuff as well, so he's taking a lot of damage. But I mean, yeah, they would have to stand still when the boss leaps and stand on top of the person that's getting leapt on to actually die in this dungeon at this point. So, yeah, I don't know how it happened. I don't know how we got to this point, but Black Mamba, they're kind of following in the footsteps of some other teams we've seen in the West region, where they're kind of just falling upwards and letting the other teams make mistakes for them. Black Mamba wins the series 2-0 somehow.
Just as that final timer is going to be wrapped up, as you guys mentioned, it's just not going to be enough, and you will see Black Mamba be taking the series. I'm with you on that one, Zyro. I don't think they had any business winning this one at the start, and One Last Chance is wiped there, or all those deaths, rather, to Shadow of Zul just absolutely threw it away onto them. So Black Mamba, however, will be moving on into the grand finals for that rematch against Buff War Nerf Rogue. And King's Rust is pretty tumultuous, Zyro.
The dream is still alive for Black Mamba. They can still make it to BlizzCon.
That's true.
All they have to do is win both remaining cups, including today's cup and the cup 2 weeks from now, and they will overtake Team D's spot for BlizzCon. So they got a shot still.
That's ridiculous. That's ridiculous that it's possible under this point. Tattles, that was some kind of dungeon. And again, we started bringing up the note about dealing with constructs versus going after more amounts of trash on the bridge.
Yeah, and it definitely felt like One Last Chance for how they ended up pathing through the dungeon. It felt like it was better than Black Mamba, but it may have actually just come down to the fact that Black Mamba had better single target DPS, and they were actually able to DPS down some of these mobs just a little bit quicker. Because as you can see, the difference between trash count from One Last Chance to Black Mamba on the Golden Serpent there was actually pretty high. One Last Chance also does something very interesting with this Purification construct into Machimba. That can actually be very dangerous. And then the alternative is what Black Mamba is doing, where they're pulling this 5-pack with the Emissary of the Tides here at the very end of the bridge, which is one of the most dangerous packs in all of World of Warcraft in any of these dungeons. So it's interesting to see that Black Mamba was pulling it. I feel like versus a better team, they could have gotten punished a little bit more for some of the mistakes that they were making, but against One Last Chance, they were able to take the series 2-0 because of it. It'll be interesting to see how it ends up working out versus Buff or Nerf Rogue, though.
Yeah, Buff or Nerf Rogue. I mean, Zyra, you mentioned previously how Supreme wasn't feeling very Supreme on how their practice was going on. But for the grand finals, you know that they got to be having a lot of time and effort put into it.
I mean, if that's the way that they played when they rolled out of bed and started playing the game, I'm scared to see how they play when they're actually practicing feeling good. So, yeah, Buff or Nerf Rogue definitely like head and shoulders. I wouldn't even say that they're a tier over everyone else in the tournament. I'd say they're multiple tiers over everyone else in the tournament. I mean, I feel like in order for Black Mamba to win this series, Buff or Nerf Rogue kind of just has to not show up.
Interesting. Well, they have showed up.
They're here.
Checkmate onto that one's ironic. So looking at it, Black Mamba does move forward. So Buff or Nerf Rogue is going to be our final matchup of the day. And it's going to start with Siege of Borealis onto this one, Nagura. Previously we saw Demon Hunter coming out, but
again?
You think we're going to be seeing it again?
I hope we do.
I hope so too. That was an incredible game, and it started showing, how we're going to be controlling any of these mobs. And they also took a pretty passive route as well with the Demon Hunter, letting all the large sigils of, what was it, the Sigil of Misery?
Yep.
Yeah, Sigil of Misery going off. So seeing all those mobs rounding them up together.
I'm still actually, I'm not completely convinced with this Demon Hunter strategy.
Really?
I mean, it looks really cool and it makes sense, but I think you're just slower. With brute forcing it and not CCing it, you're literally just faster because your damage dealer can actually do damage too. On top of, this whole setup, it takes time, right? It takes time to all gather them up, takes time to all CC them at the same time, and then you need to wait for the artillery. So it looks really cool, and it's definitely a nice strategy to think about. But we've seen, Western region strats where they just gather everything up, everyone damages, and it somehow goes down just a lot faster.
I think it's interesting because I think it also might be safer. I think you're right, though. It is definitely slower.
Yeah.
But if you watch how they end up using the Vengeance Demon Hunter, is like the most technically sound. This is how this dungeon should be done with the spotter. It is safer, but it is slower at the end of the day. So there is some risk reward that you have to be thinking about in terms of like Prot Warrior versus Vengeance Demon Hunter.
Well, that's one of I guess you could say like the mentality things we started bringing up previously is who are you ending up playing against? Salute has mentioned a couple times about preparing for the end game on this one. So that strategy in particular might be good enough to be able to deal with Black Mamba and send them out of the tournament. Well, send them to second place onto that one so that Buff or Nerf Rogue can win. But when we get to BlizzCon, as you mentioned, it's ironic, they've already qualified as they've been sent to the grand finals right now. So they have to continuously start working on some of those strategies, and maybe even week 3 will be the really big opportunity to start playing at the same level as the Western teams.
Well, I'm interested about that because this is something that JB will mention in his stream on a lot. Is one of the reasons that they were okay initially with streaming their practice for this tournament is in their minds the strategies for the dungeons between the cups and between the LAN. They're talking about spring right now. Is their strategies they were completely different for LAN than they were from the spring cup. They were just so much faster, so much more refined. And I think in a lot of the players' minds that's going to happen again. They're going to have about a month and a half of practice before BlizzCon to kind of go over, refine their strats and come up with new strategies. So that's why they're not really too worried about coming up with new strats for this cup because they feel like they're just going to get that much better for BlizzCon.